It's sounding good. All right, welcome. And today we are discussing the god Agni, who is the fire god. So, as we can see on screen, fire god slash archsmith. So this will be one of the themes. Is kind of how the smith role maybe becomes more or less emphasized in different figures, in different branches, but kind of remains there in the background, I think, in some ways. And we can see Atar, that is the Avestan fire god, and then Hephaistos the smith would be the Greek fire god, who some people don't realize he is very explicitly the fire god as well. And Josephus will go into how exactly that was understood and some details about him. And then, of course, Vulcanus would be the Roman parallel of Hephaistos, who seems to carry some of these same connections. And then the Celtic material, of course, which is something that I've focused on, and a topic that I've really tried to get across and hammer home is that, in fact, the god Manannán, or Manawydan in Welsh, is sort of a covert Agni. He is much more so than anyone else in Celtic myth. He is much more so carrying the actual mythos, the full-fledged mythos and personality, and certain key roles that we see with Agni with the Agni types in other branches. So it has to be sort of understood why and how he can be Agni, even though he's presented to us. He seems to be the sea god, or his domain is the sea. And then, of course, Odin. And Odin is mainly the Rudra type, but it seems to be, at least, and this is another sort of topic that can be explored and questioned and debated, but it seems to be that he is treated as a Rudra Agni in his core mythos, and that we have this concept of Odin and his two brothers, Odin, Heinir, and Lothar. And really, they are three aspects of one god in this creation scene. The three brothers are really faces of one, and and that Lothar is most likely the Agni aspect. But then in other places of Odin's mythos, he actually fully plays out the Agni type roles in other ways that we'll hopefully look at. And then, yeah, James feels there are, of course, Slavic parallels that we can go into. My chart doesn't really cover Slavic because of my own unfamiliarity, but these are things that can be connected from there. So Agni, of course, just in general, in the Vedic material, he is the fire god, but he also has a sort of cosmic dimension where he is the nexus of all the gods. He kind of in a way contains, or is in, he is the form of whatever of all the gods. And so we have he's at this high level of understanding of the deity, and then also just kind of carrying that out in the world in all the ways that fire can be. In the Vedic case, he is both destructive and creative fire in different places. And he is, of course, Rudra is directly identified with Agni, just like Odin has seemingly the Agni Lothar aspect within himself. Rudra, in some sense, is Agni, and that's repeated over and over again in various texts, especially the Brahmanas. Yes, and it's a complex paradox, of course, at that level, because Prajapati, Rudra's opponent, is also identified with Agni, so they both are somehow forms of this Agni. And like I said, Agni brings together, is the sort of nexus where the gods are contained together somehow. They all are forms of fire in some way that is hard to understand. So, yeah, with that, let's look at who Agni is as his own deity, because even though he has this cosmic, higher level essence or concept, he also spawns, he also breaks off into his own mythos, so that his own specific personality as a god can be understood and takes actions in certain specific roles that are specific to Agni, separate even from the Rudra mythos proper, the Prajapati mythos. Agni also is his own god. He is the fire god. So with that, let's look at Hephaistos. And what do you have to show us about Hephaistos and how he connects to Agni?
Well, we have plenty of material, so I'm just having a quick look at the Homeric hymn to Hephaistos. Obviously, this is the earlier hymn we have to this god, and it really focuses on his role as a teacher of the art, so connecting with the idea of this sort of craftsman deity, right? And obviously, these arts that are taught by Hephaistos and also by Athena are helpful for them to make a living as well as to achieve virtue and happiness. A bit more interesting, in my opinion, is the Orphic hymn to the same deity, because it explicitly identifies Hephaestus as the unending fire, akamaton pur. Then goes on to basically give a series of epithets that mostly make sense in reference to the fire. So, for instance, and even to the sun specifically, Paesimbrote means the one who brings light to mortals. And it's usually said of the sun or of the dawn at most. Pos Pore has a very similar meaning, the bringer of light. Ione is typically associated to fire deities and solar deities in particular. And then we have basically a series of epithets that are very interesting, a string of epithets that say that he's the fire who eats everything, who subdues everything, who is above everything, and who lives everywhere. So it's kind of really digging into the theology of fire as all-encompassing, a sort of supreme force in the European view. I can obviously think of the philosophy of Heraclitus, who regarded fire as the primordial element and all the other elements as basically overturnings of fire, he said. So as transformations, maybe even degradations of fire. And then we see that Hephaestus is identified with ether, which is, well, in most philosophers, another way to call fire. Some philosophers treat it as a fifth element as opposed to the four ones that we're used to. He's identified with the sun, the stars, the moon, and he's said to be Po Samianton, which means incorrupted light. This could sound straight up from maybe some Orthodox monk, but no, it's still the idea that fire is the principle of everything. So this is really interesting because obviously it compares very well to the Vedic Agni as a sort of crucial deity, a sort of universal deity that is also closely identified with Rudra and closely associated to all other deities. The Vedic Agni is explicitly characterized as three possible fires. The celestial fire, which is identified with Surya, the god of the sun. Then we have the atmospheric fire, which is identified with thunder. There are multiple deities in the Vedas who can wield the thunderbolt. Indra is obviously the prominent one, but there are others. And then we have the earthly fire. And in Vedic sacrifice, we see a number of different fires which are supposed to represent these various aspects of the god Agni. So having a Greek hymn that also identifies Hephaestus with fire, as well as the sun and other fiery bodies in the universe, kind of points to that kind of connection, right? The sun is the fire of the sky, so fire on earth is like a little sun on earth. And this is obviously speaking to the Indo-European view of everything as analogical, as above, so below, one might say. And talking about the various kinds of fire, actually, I have an interesting passage by John Lydus, one of the last authors to talk about pagan religion in the last days of the Western Roman Empire. He obviously was in the eastern part of the Roman Empire and wrote in Greek. And he tries to give an interpretation of the well-known myth in which Hephaestus marries Aphrodite, but Aphrodite cheats on him with Eris, based on the identification between Hephaestus and the earthly fire, right? Ktonios here is the adjective meaning belonging to the earth. Pure is obviously the fire. And Eris is identified with the aerial fire, the fire of air, of the atmosphere, and therefore thunder. And so obviously this has two implications. One is that Aphrodite is not really committing adultery. She's just going from one modality of fire to another. And also the implication that fire can be sterile on earth. It can be unable to procreate, whereas the aerial fire is able to procreate, right? So this is kind of a key difference between Hephaestus and Eris. Hephaestus does not manage to have children with Aphrodite, and Eris, on the other hand, is able to produce a number of children. Harmonia is generally quoted and agreed upon by authors. Other authors give other possible children to Eris and Aphrodite. But the idea is that atmospheric fire, so thunder, is the one who can produce life, as opposed to earthly fire, which is incidentally also the one stolen by Prometheus. It's kind of a lesser fire. Now, this character of earthly fire as unable to reproduce is very interesting because there has been a speculation that Hephaestus' lameness, as in lameness in his legs, could also allude to his impotence. It's highly debated, so not every scholar would agree that this is the case necessarily. What is definitely clear is that Hephaestus is said to be lame, and here we are reading a passage from Iliad Book 18, in which Hephaestus basically reminisces about his birth and says pretty explicitly that his mother wanted to hide him because she was ashamed of her son's lameness. And so she basically threw him off Olympus, and he was collected by Erinme and Thetis, two goddesses of the sea, daughters of well, one is the daughter of Oceanus, and the other is the daughter of Nereus, if I remember correctly. In the Iliad, he's never named Nereus, but he's named as the old man of the sea. Anyway, this lameness might still be symbolic, if not strictly of the inability to produce life, of some limitation associated to the earthly fire that obviously other forms of fire do not have, maybe in the atmosphere, maybe in the skies as the sun god or as any other high-ranking god. So I'm actually not sure if there's any parallel for this lameness in Vedic material. Definitely should be something to investigate. It's also been speculated that lameness could be associated with craftsmanship. Basically, the idea that craftsmen were supposed not to leave their community, and so they were maimed so that they wouldn't be able to escape. But this is kind of grasping at straws on some interpretive side. So really, I think that trying to make sense of the lameness of Hephaestus is going to be one of the challenges for comparative mythology scholars in the future, even in the near future, even for us.
Good point. On the lameness issue, it does strike me that the most likely explanation is there was a theme of the lame smith, which was just more prominent or something in the region, and became associated with him because he has certain smith roles as the fire god itself, and that just, but yeah, it's a good question, of course, and we'll go into maybe some other general smith things, because Agni does have certain things where he gives various weapons and shields and things to deities at certain points, which I have a list of in my book, and there is also the concept that the Purusha and Tvashtar. Let's see, we have like Vishvakarman and Tvashtar, the names of the cosmic smith at the highest level, and he just is identified with Agni also on that level. It's like the Purusha is a giant, whatever, unlimited blazing fire, and he is Vishvakarman, the cosmic craftsman. So there's a mingling and intertwining of these roles on a high level, I think, and it kind of filters down into Agni as just like giving certain gifts of weapons and things at certain points, but not being as emphatically the smith, where that's more reserved to Tvashtar. But then you'll see esoterically Tvashtar is identified with Agni, but he's his own thing. So it gets interesting in that respect. But yeah, it's we also have Agni at one point. He has to run away to the waters, and he hides in the waters, and and let's see, I don't know, I wonder if that has anything to do with when Hephaestus is like thrown unwanted into the waters, whether that connects anything to sort of the hiding of Agni in the waters when he's tasked with something that he doesn't want to perform. It may not, but it's an interesting kind of
well, I mean, here we do have the verb krupsai, which means to hide. So the idea of hiding in the waters was pretty much still there, even though in the Greek case, the plan to hide was actually in the mother's mind, not in Hephaestus' mind. But then we have other myths in which Hephaestus kind of lures his mother down to his forge and ties her to a chair. So maybe he kind of wants to keep hiding after being rejected and hidden by his mother, right? And he is eventually reconciled with the other gods thanks to the intervention of Dionysus.
Right, exactly. And that's a perfect kind of description in that myth of Agni. Yeah, it seems to connect somehow in some way to the Agni mythos, I think. The hiding waters. I was just looking here. It says Agni hides in the ocean, specifically in one version at least. So very similar. Yeah, you want to continue on with that?
Well, this time my rundown of Greek sources has been pretty quick, but I guess we can maybe look at some other interesting epithets, maybe see if any of them ring a bell with the Vedic material or the Celtic or Norse material as well. So, for instance, another interesting thing is basically this passage, right? Tauta gar Hephaistos mele tre toisi propaine. So these things, so fire, the sun, the stars, and the moon, show the songs of Hephaestus to mortals. That's really interesting. I'm not sure if it has been interpreted in any specific way, especially these songs, right? Mele. If that can have maybe some other interpretation, some other maybe link as well with the idea that fire is closely associated with ritual, just as ritual is closely associated with word and song. This can also, however, be translated as the limbs of Hephaestus. So in this case, do limbs maybe imply once again reference to his lameness, maybe just to his skillfulness in using his hands for artistic, and I don't know, it could be interpreted in a number of ways. Once again, should probably be looked into. Well, also another interesting thing, maybe less remarkable but still interesting, is that he is called stoikeon amempes, which literally means the blameless element. So this kind of speaks to the Indo-European theology of fire. Fire was closely associated with the priestly class in various Indo-European societies, and it was regarded as kind of the purest element. If anything, because fire always strives to go upwards, as opposed to other elements which either go downwards. So obviously, water will fall down most of the time, or anything solid would also tend to fall down thanks to gravity. And air can kind of go in circles up and down. Fire always strives upwards, so towards heaven, towards the gods, towards the divine. So this probably was pretty significant in their in the ancient people's interpretation of fire as a sacred element. Obviously, this is really Heraclitean as a concept. Once again, the idea that was already expressed actually in this epithet, which means dwelling everywhere, and then it repeats kind of the same concept. You have every house, every city, every nation. You dwell in the bodies of mortals, oh really blessed one, oh strong one. So I guess the implication is that fire is sort of a primal element. It could be kind of conceived as even a divine spark, basically, the spark of this eternal fire, which goes on to be the basis of the universe, even through its transformations into the other elements. But it's always present. It's always included in everything in creation. And even the reference to the bodies, I mean, really interesting. So even the physical body of man has that kind of spark of this divine fire, of this heavenly fire, which is eternal, perfect, blameless, and everything else. And this is obviously really also speaking to the non-dual interpretation that Indo-European traditions have of reality, right? If everything is fire, then obviously everything has to be connected by virtue of being this common fire or sharing at least a part of this common fire, right? That's really deep, I guess, deeply ingrained in the way Indo-Europeans interpret the world. At least various historical Indo-European peoples did. So let's look maybe if there's there's something interesting actually, because Hephaestus is also asked among the other things that are maybe more generic. He's asked to put a stop to the madness derived from the unending fire. This is interesting. I am pretty sure this is specifically relevant to ritual context of the Orphic hymns. We also have other hymns in which some deities are asked to ward off madness or false visions and all these sorts of things that can happen, I guess could happen inside the temple that produced the Orphic hymns. This connection to madness is interesting. Madness is pretty much a Rudraic trait as far as we can see across the various branches. So once again, it would be nice to maybe look into the connection between Agni and states of consciousness that are not the normal one. In Odin, this could easily be a mix of Agni, Rudra, and maybe even Varuna kind of traits. So maybe take that with a pinch of salt. But definitely, definitely something to look into. I'm
Did you
also
say?
thinking that.
Oh, sorry. Just to clarify, did you
Yeah,
say that he drives away madness there, or was it something else?
So he's asked to put a stop to it.
Yeah. Okay.
So presumably this means that he's the same deity who can cause it and stop it, just like Apollo and other deities have both the power to do something and to stop it or prevent it or reverse it, right? Apollo in the case of physical illness, usually.
Yeah, of course.
I was also
Agni,
kind of
Agni inflames in all ways conceivable. He is, digestive fire, sexual fire, mental fire. So he inflames within the person, and that could, of course, connect to madness, like you said. But then, of course, he's also the purifier who drives away demons and things like that, clears the sacred space, and that could also be mentally purifying and clarifying. So the light of clarity is also fire. So yeah, continue.
Yeah, definitely makes sense as a match. I was also wondering, back to the earlier lines about this sort of universality of fire. Uh, Maybe the idea of fire hiding in the waters, right? We mentioned earlier, both Vedic and Greek material point to really the concept of hiding specifically. It could possibly point out a dual view of reality. The idea that even water, which is supposed to be the opposite of fire, actually includes that primeval, unique fire, which is the substance of all of the universe, right? So I think it could be an interpretation implied in the idea of hiding. Obviously, it is hidden because it's not self-evident that something like water would contain the same fire that we see elsewhere in the shape of fire or in the shape of a lightning bolt or of the sun. But non-duality implies that necessarily, even in water, you have that same primal element, that same fire.
Right. And there is a whole theology around how that worked in Vedic sources, which I go into a bit in my book, which was that fire is kind of hiding in the waters, and it essentially comes down in sort of the rain cycle, in the water cycle of nature. It comes down from the skies in the rain, and it then is absorbed in the plants, and that's the explanation for why when you spark a stick, when you create fire from rubbing sticks together or whatever, fire bursts out of plants, and plant essentially meaning this is why plants are flammable. It's because they have the capacity or the essence of fire in them, and they had this whole complex understanding of how that fire cycles through nature. Then the fire when you burn the plant, the fire essence seems to go to the heavens, and the cycle repeats either through lightning coming to earth or rains. So and that is there in the concept, this crucial concept that Agni, that fire, is in the waters and lives in the waters, hides in the waters, and that it is his domain. And so MacDonald, the scholar MacDonald, A.A. MacDonald, Arthur Anthony MacDonald, he says that essentially the most prominent thing said about Agni in the Rig Veda, repeated over and over again, is that he lives in the waters even. So he says, quote, Agni rests in all streams. In the later ritual texts, Agni in the waters is invoked in connection with ponds and water vessels. Thus, even in the oldest Vedic period, the waters in which Agni is latent, though not those from which he is produced, may in various passages have been regarded as terrestrial. Let's see. In any case, the notion of Agni in the waters is prominent throughout the Vedas. Water is Agni's home, as heaven is that of the sun. See Rig Veda 5.85.2 and Atharva Veda 13.1.50. The waters are also often mentioned along with the plants or wood as his abode. So it's that concept I mentioned of the waters springing out, hiding in the water. Agni hiding in the waters and springing out of the plants and the wood. So yeah, it's just something that is kind of missed sometimes, or not realized, that this is just very thorough, well-established Vedic understanding of Agni, that his domain, his most prominent domain is the waters, really. Although he has a triple domain, or multiple, or everywhere, he lives everywhere, often divided into 3 canonical births, as in he is known to be born in the 3 domains, essentially born from the heavens, born from the waters, and born from the earth, or it's divided in different ways in different mentions. MacDonald says, quote, in fact, the abode of the celestial Agni in the waters is one of the best established points in Vedic mythology, unquote. And so in all of Vedic mythology, he says, actually, it's one of the best established points. So this is something that, again, it's people aren't aware of or forget when looking at the Celtic Agni. And as we could see with Hephaistos, as mentioned, Hephaistos, like Agni, has multiple parentages, so to speak, which you could map those to the like triple birth of Agni, so that Agni is born celestially. He is then also born from the waters and born terrestrially on the earth. But of course, Hephaistos is born on Olympus. That's his celestial birth, and then he's cast to the waters, and then fostered by, as Josephus mentioned, the nymphs and or Nereus. Is that what he said?
Nereus' daughter. So the nymph,
Nereus' daughter. Okay.
daughter of Nereus, who is called the old man of the sea. So still, they're all water-related deities, right?
Yes. So again, that kind of gets glossed over.
Like, sorry, what did you say?
Oh, I was just saying sometimes that gets missed, or people don't often know about that sort of fosterage of Hephaistos in the waters. It's. I just want to bring that to the forefront. Yeah.
I was about to say that Hephaestus' mother Hera was also fostered by sea deities, specifically Oceanus, the god of the ocean, right, of this kind of encircling river around the whole known world, and Tethys, who is different from Thetis. Thetis is the one who fosters Hephaestus, and Tethys is the one who fosters Hera. This is also referenced in the Iliad. So definitely interesting that both the fire deity and his mother, who is often associated with the air, are both raised by the waters, right? They are fostered by water deities. Obviously different generations of water deities, but still pretty closely associated with water. And both like salty water and sweet water In the case of Hera, this is represented by Oceanus, who was actually conceived as being a god of sweet water somehow, and Tethys as a goddess of salt water. Whereas in the case of Hephaistos, we have Eurynome, who is a daughter of Oceanus. So she's also a goddess of presumably of sweet water. But then we have Thetis, who is a daughter of Nereus, who is clearly associated with the sea, so salt water. So it's really interesting. It kind of speaks to the deep connection once again between fire deity and waters in Greek tradition, which is kind of overlooked, as you said, compared maybe to the Vedic tradition, which reiterates it, emphasizes it, and also maybe makes it somewhat less comical. Like obviously Homer kind of makes it into a funny scene of the mother throwing her son off the Mount Olympus, as opposed to maybe the Vedic hymns, which are hymns, so they are addressed directly to the deity, and so they are trying to be maybe more respectful and also maybe try to settle theological questions in a way different from an epic poem such as Homer's Iliad might do.
Yeah, I did find it. So I'm just going to repeat myself a little bit, but just like, I wonder if Agni sort of, I think he's asked to confront somebody, and it's slipping my mind whether it's Rudra or a demon or something, and he runs off to hide in the waters. It's sort of, there's this element of shame attached to him hiding in the waters, which reminds me of Hephaistos being sort of shamefully thrown into the waters. So that's interesting, possibly. Also, I will note that Agni is also called the embryo of the waters in Rig Veda 3.1.12 through 13, and that he's kindled in the waters in Rig Veda 10.45. So he is the embryo, garbha, of the waters and kindled in the waters. So those are images of birth, so that he is, in a sense, the child of the waters, which is why he gets conflated with the deity Apam Napat, whose name literally means, nephew or descendant of the waters. And there is reason to believe that they were separate deities in Proto-Indo-European due to the Iranic material, especially, and other comparisons. However, you can see already that Agni is said to be the embryo of the waters and kindled in the waters in these other hymns, and so he's already such a similar concept to Apam Napat that it was probably a simple connection. Maybe they were connected from the start, and who knows what. But it was easy to understand that they could be conflated due to that overlap. So that embryo of the waters, it's like saying child of the waters in a sense, and that of course is the name of Manannán. Maclir is Manannán, son of the sea. He is son of the sea. Maclir as his most prominent, most important information in his name. So that is there in the Vedic material, is what I'd like to say, is that something very similar is there. We also then have in some Norse material that let's see, there is, let me read this sentence that I have saved here. We have a probable comparison to this naming convention in Old Norse Saevar Nither, Saevarni, Nidna. What is that? I was confused the thorn and the eth, but in any case, then R. And then that means descendant of the sea, and it's a kenning for fire in apparently in Norse language. Okay, so you have, if you look up this concept, it may theoretically be a trace of descendant of fire being a kenning descendant of the sea, being a kenning for fire. So that would be support for this concept carrying through into Western Europe, of course, Northwestern Europe. Quite interesting, I think. Yeah. Is there any more Greek points you wanted to continue with on that, or do you have? Yeah.
Well,
when you run out, that's fine.
I don't know if you want to kind of maybe try to go the Twashtar kind of way. Obviously, the Homeric hymn doesn't mention pretty much anything about water, but it does mention Hephaestus as a teacher of the arts and as famous because of the arts. So maybe that connects more to Twashtar or to some sort of craftsman deity, or even a teacher deity. Not necessarily specifically fire, even though obviously in this case we are dealing with a fire deity. It's also clear that these hymns are situational, right? So Homeric hymns were often written for very specific context. For instance, for a specific festival or a specific event that happened, and we often don't know much about the context other than what the hymn itself says, or maybe if we're lucky, what some scholiasts have to write on the topic. So maybe there was some reason why in this specific instance, the poet focuses on Hephaestus as a teacher of the arts, as opposed to maybe anything else, as opposed to maybe a god of fire as an element, which is instead the focus of the Orphic hymn. And obviously in the case of the Orphic hymn, I can see why fire as an element is more relevant, right? They're obviously written for usage inside the temple for rituals, and so connecting to the deeper, more theological, more philosophical even part of the deity was crucial, right? Other than that, I don't think we have like much more to say from Greek sources, definitely.
Yeah. The only other thing in Greek sources that is interesting in my mind is just how fully Hephaestus kind of steps into the fire role in the Iliad, in the portion where Achilles fights river Scamander. And then, so Achilles is fighting, of course, Xanthus or Scamander, the river, and then I think essentially Achilles is in trouble because he's fighting the river and it's kind of starting to swirl him all around, and he prays to the gods, if I'm remembering correctly, and they send Agni to dry up the river Scamander, which this is interesting in the as a possible similar event to sort of what becomes the Battle of the Ten Kings stuff that I've been going into a lot recently. So you can kind of see that it's also significantly different and far away from that, but there are things worth tracing in there about Agni being the one to dry up the river, and Achilles is arguably an incarnation of the Indra and or Vishnu type, the warrior type. And then you have him calling on Agni. It's interesting that Vasishta, who calls on Indra in the Battle of the Ten Kings, Vasishta is sometimes seen as an incarnation or related to Agni. He's the sage, he's the seer calling on Indra to make the waters part. So I wonder if there was anything connecting there, or if that is coincidental, because it's also quite different in this material. But what do you think about that? Is there anything in the appearance of Hephaestus to bring this full blaze of fire in the Iliad? To me, it's just a great example of how, yes, he is the fire god quite fully and literally. He's not just the smith, because he's the one who brings the destructive fire to dry up the river there to save the day.
It definitely points to his fiery nature as a kind of deeply ingrained essence, nature of this deity. There was an article by Allen discussing a similarity between this episode from the Iliad and an episode from the Mahabharata. in which Arjuna and Krishna basically have to fight Indra, which is really interesting. Obviously, it's all a test. Indra is Arjuna's father, so he's benevolent towards Arjuna, but he wants to kind of test him by fighting. And Arjuna and Krishna have to resort to a helping hand from the god Agni, right? So Indra is obviously leveraging all the minor deities and spirits related to clouds, rain, winds, and on the other hand, Agni is conjuring fire as his ability, right? And he burns the whole forest down. There was obviously this sort of forest in which the battle was taking place, and this ensures that Arjuna is victorious over Indra. Indra is very pleased with this, and then they go on obviously to the battle of Kurukshetra, right? And Indra in that circumstance is favorable to Arjuna, having been defeated by him. Obviously, there are differences, most notably rain in a forest as opposed to the river's commander, right? But it's still interesting, and also there's a different timeline, right? The episode discussed by Alan happens before Kurukshetra, whereas the episode in the Iliad is during the siege of Troy. So there are differences, but it's still interesting to note that both Hephaestus and Agni can become helpers of the warrior type of hero against some water-related deity of sword.
Yes, yes, exactly. That to me that sounds like a strong parallel. You have Agni, as you said, just sort of on this destructive, yeah, you have him doing a similar thing there, but within the forest. You said, right? So I could see a definite connection there. Also, this is that was what I was talking about. Sevar Nither. That's what I just brought up a couple minutes ago, but I couldn't spell it. So thank you. Thank you for typing that in the comments. Descendant of the water. So you have it there, and it means fire, apparently. Okay, so I'll just go into a couple of things I wanted to point out, building from that about Manannán. So yeah, despite the fact that we have these kind of connections, we can see that Agni, yes, he is emphatically a water and ocean living god, lord of the waters in a sense. It still can be hard to picture Manannán as Agni because he doesn't do a lot of outwardly fire. He's not throwing fire around all the time per se, although in fact I found a couple of points where he does do so, which those on their own are strange. For if he's just an ocean god, why is he, for example, killing? I believe it's he kills Mither and Mither's spouse Fuavnach with fire, using fire. It says he burns them. He has, let's see, what is it? He has. Well, in any case, there's also another story where a woman is going to be burnt as a punishment for adultery, and they call Manannán to decide whether someone is burnt in a ritual, in a fire, punishment. So why is he the overseer of that? Is interesting to question. And
actually, on this topic, Agni, Agni in Vedic material, is often the deity who tests the virginity of a bride, right?
Precisely.
In Rome, however, that's not Vulcan, but that's Vesta, or Vesta with the classical pronunciation. Obviously, she had virgin priestesses, and obviously the priestess's virginity was supposed to be kind of paralleling the purity of the fire as an element. And we have instances of best virgins undergoing ordeals to prove that they had kept their oath of virginity, and they passed the oaths thanks to the help of the goddess, right? Pretty much like in Vedic India, we have Agni, who is in charge of this test.
Exactly. So that's a perfect example. And this is an example of how Manannán repeatedly, instead of just throwing fire around, even though he does, at least in that mention where he kills Mither and his consort with fire for some reason, he keeps stepping into these roles, which, if you understand the theology, that's a fire role. That's an Agni type role. And it's over and over and over again, to the point where you realize, instead of throwing around fire, he is the fire, and he plays out the myth as the embodiment of the fire in these specific ways. So, as for example, the sort of judge of the the adultery, the purity, it's very similar to the case of Sita from the Ramayana, or rather, it's actually described in the Mahabharata. Vanaparva, chapter 201, Shloka 28, and Agni oversees the Agni Parishka fire test, which Sita is subjected to test her virtue and purity, and she passes the test, of course. I think that's where she sits on a blazing fire in some way. Is that right? Because I haven't read the Ramayana, but are you familiar with how that goes down?
I think she kind of just walks between the flames and maybe on hot coals, but I'm not sure. Like, I would have to look the passage up for details.
Right. Okay. In any case, it's this testing rule, which then you also see embodied in another version of the fire test in Iranic and Vedic material. Connects more to the drink of a fiery drink. So it's like it is the concept of blazing water, fire in water, of course, in itself. But trial by fire in general is obviously an Agni domain. And so in Iranic texts, we have a heat ordeal in general. And then also in the Vendidad, violating truth is tested and detected by drinking a kind of blazing water or fire in water, which may have had brimstone or sulfur in it. And this was a thing. This was a thing in those societies. So that's why it's interesting to see that Manannán is the one in Irish myth who is the keeper and bestower of this cup of truth in the story, his three calls to Cormac. So Cormac, Mac Airt, and he tests Cormac. He's in this story, and it's all about testing Cormac, essentially. And he gives Cormac this cup of truth and falsity, and it plays out as an expression of this Indo-European concept of the drink that tests truth. And therefore, that is a fire, that is an Agni role, and Manannán just happens to have that once again. We also have, I wanted to touch on just a couple of the Smith connections to Manannán. We have, for instance, he has the hook of Goibniu. So this is, again, another thing you have to scratch your head. Why does this random quote unquote sea god have the hook of Govniu, rather, the smith proper, who's like the Tvashtar? But here we have Manannán with the hook of Govniu. That is the hook of the smith. Therefore, it's sort of winking to you that he is also a smith, and he gives various gifts very similar to Agni. He gives swords. He gives swords to Angus, I believe, and as well as gifts to Lugh, as far as I remember. And then perhaps most interestingly with this connection, though, is the question of the Welsh Manawyddon, because everyone understands Manannán as a sea god and thinks, he clearly, obviously, is a sea god and has a connection to the sea. But then when you look at the Welsh parallel, you see Manawyddon, who seems to clearly be, his name seems to clearly connect to Manannán and be, from a common root somehow. However, Manawyddon has essentially no connection to being in the waters other than his name, which is, again, it's consistent, Manawyddon, son of Llŷr. But nothing he does is really sea-related in his stories. So it leaves you, if that's his main role, then why is he not doing anything with water? But when you understand him connected to fire, you realize everything he does in his stories is embodying Agni myths more so, rather than pulling fire out of his sleeves. He is being the fire himself. And you even have, once again, hammering home his sort of smith craftsman role, because in the story, Manawyddon, son of Llŷr, in the Mabinogi, you have Manawyddon and Pryderi, and they have to go off and kind of like they have to find work while there is this this wasteland that happens and drives things into sort of chaos, a mystical what do you call it, just a mystical conflict in the plot, where there has this mist and this wasteland has arisen. They have to go and find work, and then what they do is they learn a couple of different trades. So it says they betook themselves to making saddles, and Manawyddon began to make housings, and he gilded and colored them with blue enamel, in the manner that he had seen it done by Llásar. And we see Llásar in a previous story in a role that seems to be the Purusha role, where he is burnt in an iron house, and then he has to escape, burst out of this iron house that is trying to cook him, and he then brings from that ordeal a magical cauldron full of what seems to be sacred liquid, and that gets passed down through the other gods afterwards, which is what happens to the Purusha in other ways in the Shatapatha Brahmana rituals, where one aspect of that is that the ritual, well, first of all, Purusha is the fire sacrifice, that he is the fire altar, and he is sacrificing himself in this fire sacrifice in a way, because he is the cosmic fire, he is the cosmic Agni even. And then this causes the Soma, which he also is Soma, because he is the Godhead in a sense. He's the totality of Godhead, and it causes the Soma to rise within him, so that it can then be extracted or received by the priest, who then, in some aspect of the ritual, draws the Soma out, and there it is. And so that is kind of what Llásar seems to be doing in his story within the Branwen branch of the Mabinogi, and that happens right before the creation myth part of that story. So he seems to be Purusha, and then so this says right here that Manawyddon is taking up the craft of making saddles with blue enamel, and this is carrying on a craft or an art that seems to have come from Llásar, who is the Purusha, And the Purusha, again, is the primordial Agni. He is the Godhead who can be given different names, but at least in the Shatapatha Brahmana, Agni is the very first name assigned to the Purusha. Essentially, he is the fires that congeal together into a Purusha, a personage, divine totality. And then that Purusha is Vishvakarman, who has the primordial craftsman role as well. So he is this smith, quote unquote, on the very highest level there. And so thus we see right here in the Manawidhan story that Manawidhan is carrying on this craftsman role from that primordial Agni / Vishvakarman who was really the Purusha. So it's like his own higher self, which is Hlasar, you could say, esoterically. But nonetheless, regardless, you have here Manawidhan as this prominent carrier forward of the smithing roles specifically. And so why should that be? If he is just the ocean god, it is because he is this fire god carrying forward the fire role from Hlasar specifically. And it's all right there. And then that is reinforced by what we see with Manannán having the hook of Govnio, of course. It's this consistent trait that makes no sense unless you know what you're looking at and you know that this really is this encoded Agni type. And then it all makes perfect sense, which is great. So, yeah. Any other thoughts? I'm trying to look here. I'm going to look real quick for one quote, and I will just be right back. So, if anyone has anything to add.
Well, something I think is worth mentioning. I've been reading a continental Germanic saga that was translated in Old Norse called Theodric Saga of Bern. And in it, there's the son of Wayland the Smith. He has on his banner his father's tongs and hammer. And then he's good friends with Hymir, who we've talked about in the Patreon chat. Could be like a euhemerized version of Heimdall. And later on in the story, after he already meets Dietrich of Bern, Dietrich is chasing him to claim some kind of weregild on him out of revenge. And Wayland's son, his name is Vitiga or Vidga, or many different pronunciations for his name. He escapes Dietrich by riding into the sea where his grandmother, like some water nymph, protects him. Which to me sounded kind of similar to Manannán here as being like, descendant of the waters, but also having the tools of Goivnu, who, if we look at the cosmic craftsman smithing competition, Wayland as a son of Ivaldi will kind of be in the same position as Goivnu, but that's all I really have on that so far.
That's interesting. Definitely, I could see that. So yeah, along with this, I just wanted to get the right details, but Manannán distributes many of the famous treasures and weapons of the Tuatha Dé Danann. He presides over Govnu's feast and commissions a shield from the craft god Lucra, and also crafts himself the magical crane bag. So he does explicitly craft there. And he is said to have the belt and smith's hook of Goivnu. So, yeah, you see this overlap, which makes sense, I think, only in this light. Then he also is said to have scorched javelins. So he has scorched javelins in the stories O'Donnell's Kern and Manannán at Play, which may just be based on O'Donnell's Kern. I think we were discussing the other day. But in any case, scorched javelins, why on earth would he have those? Why all of these things if you're just the ocean god? So I just want to keep driving that home. It's it's funny when you really look at it. The other thing that I love about, again, the Welsh Manawyddan is that then his whole story really centers around this. Other than him being a blacksmith, it then centers around driving away this hostile, the destructive magic, this illusion magic of a hostile sorcerer. And again, as MacDonald says in his summary of Agni, driving away specifically hostile sorcerers and their effects, as well as demons, is perhaps the most well attested role, other than just standard being the sacrificial fire, of Agni in Vedic material, is that he drives away the effects of hostile sorcerers upon the sacred space, for example, in order to clear the sacred space so that the sacrifice then can take place. So we see that the entire story of Manawyddan is him embodying this, one of the most prominent roles, again, of Agni. So it's essentially everything he's doing in the story is to a T what Agni should be doing, and he also is not shown with a strong connection to the ocean, which of course he does have a strong connection to the ocean, but we can see that it can drop away in a story like the Welsh one because it is not of his essence in the way that fulfilling the fire roles really is what he's about. And so I think this picture, it just only makes sense when you understand who he is. It's why it's so important. And along with that, just in a way, understanding Manannán as Agni is sort of a culmination or an accumulation based on all the things we've discussed up to this point in other streams and videos, because it's once you understand this, you realize that in all of these key moments in other myths where we would expect to see Agni in the Vedic material or a parallel in other branches, where we would expect that type in a Celtic story, suddenly Manannán seems to appear. So as we've discussed in the past, when Cian steals back the Glasgavnin, the cow, from Tory Island, who ferries him back? But Manannán appears in his boat to ferry him back. Of course, that's why should he be there when usually it is the Agni type who is somehow combining with the Pushan type, and his role is specifically to bring the sacred liquid back from the mountain. For example, Odin turns into the eagle to bring the mead of poetry back from Suttungur's island. After he has infiltrated it in the sort of the Pushanic role, he then turns into the eagle himself to fly it back. In the Irish story, Cian is the Pushan, and he infiltrates and obtains the cow of the wondrous milk, and then it's Manannán who has to appear to ferry him back in that tale. And so it's another tally for the Manannán Agni appearances and alignments. And then one of the most important ones is then the creation myth with Manawyddan, which is the Branwen story, Branwen, daughter of Llŷr. We have this scene where Efnisien, Nisien, Manawyddan, and then also Bran is present, and they all are confronted with the boy Gwern, the son of Matholwch. Matholwch is Father Sky. So this picture, it doesn't make sense until you start to put the pieces together and understand who each of the figures is. But nonetheless, Matholwch is Father Sky, who is going to be killed in the war. He is essentially Ymir. And Gwern is his son, sort of the offspring of the Father Sky. And Gwern means alder. after Gwern is thrown into the fire, then at the end of the story, we see that ancestors of humans are found in caves. In parallel stories that I've gone into, the seed of Father Sky falls into the fire in the creation myth. And from that springs the tree ancestors of humans. So it's more tied together in for example, the Ironic version, and then with parallels that you can find in the ash tree nymphs of Greek, and the Angirases, the fire youths who spring from the seed of Father Sky in the Vedic, but they don't have the tree association. In any case, there's this theme that the first ancestor in this story, the first ancestor of humans, has a tree name like Alder, right? We have Ask and Embla in the Norse creation myth, right? Asker and Embla, and those are the tree, quote unquote, tree ancestors of humans. And Asker means ash, as in, or it's related to ash. I think it means ash. Maybe someone could correct me, but he is essentially, it's implied that he is connected to the ash tree. And in that famous scene from the Norse creation myth, Asker and Embla are found by three figures who are Odin, Villian Ve, or now it's slipping my mind if it's the Villian Ve or Heiner and Lother version who finds them specifically. So I'd have to look at the details, but let's assume those are equivalent, as many people do. In any case, it's Odin and his two brothers, right? And we've discussed how Lother, one of the brothers, is probably Agni, fire aspect. In the scene with Gwern, we have Ephnisian and Nisian. Those seem to be Rudra and Agni types, as we've gone into elsewhere. And then we have Manawyddan along with them as the third brother in this trio. And then Bran also, who is with them, but does not seem to match with any of the brothers of Odin, because he is a different type. He's more like Mimir, in my opinion. So it'd be like if Mimir was standing there alongside Odin and his brothers. That's how I would explain it. And in any case, it is these specific figures and none others who happen to be there at the first greeting of the tree child of Father Sky, and who, when he is sort of committed to the fire, which will then spark and sort of remanifest the human ancestors later. So who should be there, of course, but the Rudra type, the Shiva type, Ephnisian and Nisian, and their brother, who is Manawyddan. So if that makes sense to you, then it is a key, because why should the ocean, why should just an ocean or any random god be in that grouping? Once you understand that he is Agni, he fits right there in a more or less perfect parallel with Lother in that trio of three brothers. So, and really it comes down to, again and again, this keeps happening. You can tally these, where most of the things that you see Manannán or Manawyddan do, it is fulfilling, is playing out an Agni role. And that even comes down to, again, just to sort of complete the Soma cycle we went into, the other part of Manawyddan's story is that he marries Rhiannon, who had been the wife of Puith. Puith, as we said, was kind of the Gandharva in the Soma cycle marriage sequence that we see in the Surya's Bridal hymn, Rig Veda, in the 10th book there. And the sequence was Surya is wife of Soma, then the Gandharva, then finally Agni as the third husband. Of course, we saw Puith sleep in the bed with the wife of the Soma type Araun. Then he goes and finds his own shining bride, who seems to be esoterically connected. In the Rig Veda hymn, it says, "Go forth, Gandharva Visvavasu, and seek your own daughter of the sun," essentially. And so that's what Puich does and finds Rhiannon. Then it just so happens, once again, that Rhiannon, after Puich dies, transfers as wife to Manawyddan. So you have the bride transferring from the Gandharva type, so to speak, Puich, to finally the Agni type. And in my opinion, that completes the symbolic sequence of husbands for the sun princess, and that ends right there with Manawyddan perfectly. And as he's sort of he goes forth and is a smith and clears the land of hostile sorcerer influence, just like Agni, which seems to symbolically prepare the scene for some sort of cosmic sacrifice, which in my opinion is sort of setting the stage, clearing the scene in a calendrical sense, for the rebirth of the sun sacrifice, which occurs in the next branch. The next branch is all about the sunrise mythos of Math and Hle, and it seems like Manawyddan has set the stage for what is a symbolic sort of sacrifice. The sacrifice brings the sunrise, and that's what Manawyddan is doing and all of that. Yeah. Sorry, that was all over the place. Just trying to hit all these key points. Anyone have any thoughts to add on that? I can go to the next subject if not.
All good here.
All right.
Yeah, definitely all good. It was definitely a lot of material that should also inspire us to look maybe into the Greek, Roman, and other sources for more parallels once again.
Right. Yeah, it's to me it's fascinating when things are kind of under the surface, but when you look at it the right way, it all piles up, and you can finally see what's really happening. It's also, like I just mentioned, this could be pertinent to the calendar because I've been trying to kind of pin it down. The sunrise motif, the sunrise myth of Math, seems connected to May, most likely like May Day type of stuff. I think that would be the sunrise of Math, although that's arguable. And so leading up to that, when you look at different calendars, and it's a specific one isn't coming to mind right now, but sometimes there's a month related to the fires, purification by fires. So I wonder if there's something there that could be looked at about months leading up to May, that could be connected to the story of Manawyddan and how it's this full story of him sort of clearing the space of hostile influences that may connect to a festival even, or a festival time in a month leading up to May. I think that's an interesting possibility. Maybe there's something in Roman or Greek as well that could link to something like that. I don't know.
Well, there was a festival of Vulcan in the month of August, and it involved sacrificing fishes, which is noted by Dumézil because Agni is said to be the enemy of fish. So there should be some sort of parallel, but I'm not sure if that would be the same kind of festival. It's a generic summer festival then, or maybe there are different festivals with different connotations.
Right. Interesting. There might be something in the Coligny calendar, which could be worth looking into. But yeah, I think that's those are the main points in terms of Manannán. Then you also have. I just want to make it clear that I also think that Aidh, just the god son of Dagda, usually named Aidh, Aed. He is also an aspect of the fire. So you mentioned earlier how the fire of Prometheus that he steals is the terrestrial fire. Is that correct?
Yes, and I think this is relevant that he steals the earthly fire, the fire belonging to Hephaestus, as opposed to maybe the fire of Ares or of Zeus or some other deity, because it kind of points to the hidden quality of this fire, right? We talked about it earlier, the nature of Agni hiding in the waters, Hephaestus being hidden by his mother and thrown into the waters. So this kind of implies that the human fire, the fire that is accessible to us, is also hidden underneath a layer of water. So maybe our kind of divine spark hidden under, waters would specifically usually mean emotions, but in general, hidden by everything that can cloud our understanding of the divine spark in us.
Right. Interesting. Yeah. And this is important also because this is exactly what my conclusion was about Ive, is that he is much more the terrestrial fire, at least under that name in those tales. And Manannán seems more to be the celestial fire whose domain is the water. So as it said in one of the quotes I read, the celestial fire is then born from the waters, interestingly. And so Manannán is much more that celestial fire for the most part. There could be different roles that are allocated differently. You never know. But yeah, because what's interesting is that I seemed to find the parallel of the Prometheus theft of fire in the story of Ith specifically, where once again it's told as a story, a drama between personages, but he really is embodying the fire, which in the Prometheus story is more just fire that is stolen. In the story of Ive, it is that there is a sort of love triangle, and this other figure named Corgen, and it's Corrgend. And this story is told in the Dinshenahas, and it's in at least 2 different Dinshenahas stories that you have to read to get the full story. But in any case, I go into this in my book as well. But Corgen kills Ive and then buries him, and then there is placed over him a stone and a roundhouse, which is like there's some kind of sort of shrine or sacred space erected over top of Ith, essentially as his grave, where Ith the fire has been killed and placed and put in the ground with a sort of symbolic shrine roundhouse built over top of him. So this seemed to be actually the Celtic version from the same root as the Prometheus stealing fire myth. So Ith is the fire, but he is this terrestrial fire that then gets, a shrine. He is connected to some kind of, being in the earth. Specifically, he's placed in the earth, buried in the earth. He's terrestrial and can be accessed via what have you, whether they saw that as being just accessed through shrines or hearthfire. I'm not sure. But in any case, he just is fire. He just is the terrestrial form much more. And so I would recommend checking out my book chapter on that. I go much more in detail about why Ith really is this terrestrial fire stolen by Prometheus in that version, because there are other details that show this to be the case. But I won't go into that one too much unless anyone wants me to. But that gets the idea across. I would recommend reading my chapter. It's pretty detailed on why this is the case. And that kind of explains why you can have Manannán and Ith both be Agni, but in their different aspects, and it reinforces this idea that the Indo-Europeans really had this ideology of multiple fires, but they connect on a deeper level, of course. We also see that Delvaith is the name of the Purusha in the Irish. That name has the word Ive in it, Delv Ive. So once again, that means fire. Delvaith means like forming fire or form fire, something like that. And Delvaith is really this Purusha, which is the highest form of Agni, which is the totality of the Godhead, essentially, and is the equivalent of that Hlasar that we talked about before, which is like, so it's like the higher form of Manannán or Manawithon in that story. We then have Delv Ive with the very word Ive in his name. We then also have Gol Macmorna. His birth name is Ive. So he is a continuation of Ive. And once you understand that Gol is very much one of the faces of the Rudra, it shows that overlap or equivalency, identification, esoteric identification between Rudra and Agni is very, very much alive in the Celtic material, because Gol is Ive also. Okay. Was there anything in the Norse that you wanted to discuss, Arno, or not necessarily? Or a different topic? I know there was another topic you mentioned as well before. Would you like to branch into another thing, or?
Yeah, we can. I can bring that stuff up. So I noticed how, like, kind of jumping off what you were just saying about the difference between the celestial and terrestrial fires. Some of the issue.
Uh-oh. You're cut out there.
Did it mute me? Okay.
Oh, yeah, I think you just got muted. Yeah, that's.
So there's a slight room for error when trying to find Agni parallels in European pantheons, because whereas in India, Agni is all fire all the time, everywhere, it seems that different, like, mythic personalities will be placed onto fires that serve different purposes in European pantheons. And I noticed that, well, you mainly have in, like, Greece and Italy, the smith and the domestic fire, like Hephaistos and Hestia, or Vulcanus and Vesta. It's separated a bit differently in the north, and I think the separations are pretty similar between Gaelic and Scandinavian mythology. Excuse me. So you have
going off of what Arno said, well, actually, the case of Greek Hestia and Roman Vesta is really interesting, because she's clearly a goddess of fire, specifically the hearth fire, so the one inside the house. But she's also a goddess associated with the earth. She's even identified with the earth by a couple of authors, including Ovid and Macrobius. So she is very ambivalent, right? Earth is the cold and dry element. Fire is the hot and dry element. Earth is the element that tends to go downwards, and fire is the one which always goes upwards. So it's really interesting that the same goddess was somehow associated to both of these elements, right? To both of these parts of the universe. This obviously points really to the non-dual theology of Indo-Europeans. This is pretty clear. It might also point maybe to some connection of the terrestrial fire specifically with the earth herself, right? It could be implying that the earth is also made of fire, is also one of the transformations of fire. So once again, Heraclitean kind of concept was definitely not exclusive to this philosopher. It was probably more widespread across the Indo-European area.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. I didn't know much about Hestia and Westus, so thank you for that. Because it's kind of confused me a little bit, but yeah, I was just responding to that comment real quick. But
yeah, I would just agree with that in general.
Yeah, that smithing competition is pretty consistent throughout all Indo-European lore, and it pretty clearly puts like there's a version where it is specifically Wayland in a smithing competition
Mhm.
against the court smith of King Nidhung,
Right.
but instead of the Sons of Vivaldi, but in other places
Right.
he's called the Son of Vivaldi.
Exactly. So that's the thing it
Yeah,
hinges on. If Volander is indeed one of the sons of Vivaldi, canonically, then those are the ones who are in the competition in the more well-known story, and they are very much the Ribhus. So if Volander is a son of Vivaldi, then he should be the Ribhu. And I go into that in my book. It's a confusing issue actually, but it makes sense as if those things are true, right?
yeah, and I'm sure. I wonder how confident Josephus is in the etymology between Oribus and elves, because
We've discussed that a little. I
we
think it
okay
was.
already. Okay,
I think no, not on here, but in the past, I think it was sort of not there. I think I even mentioned in my book that it's not really linguistically viable or established, or maybe it's just unknown. What would you say on that, Josephus? If you're there, maybe he stepped aside. No.
Well, it really depends on whether the R in Ribu is originally an L or an R, right? These two sounds were probably different in Proto-Indo-European. They are definitely different in languages such as Germanic languages, Greek, Latin, etc. That they are not usually distinguished in Sanskrit. We can see either one of them becoming either one of the other, like it either can become the other one basically. Uh, so if Ribu could be proven to be from Libu, then elf would be an acceptable cognate. But until that can be done, some doubt is going to remain. There is a very interesting proposal to derive Ribu from the same root that in Hittite means to change status, right? So this could maybe be fitting, but then again, they are basically workers, right? I'm not sure they are supposed to change their status
Yeah,
to
strange.
a
well, the Rebus
significant
are
degree.
laborers, but because of how impressed the gods are with their skills, they're accepted among them and become a part of the gods. So that's pretty interesting.
Okay, so yeah, definitely that could be an argument in favor of this alternate proposal. Incidentally, this proposal would mean that Orpheus, the Greek poet and hero, would also share the same etymological root with these Ripu.
Wow.
However, sharing an etymological root of the name, as we often say, does not necessarily equal being the same figure.
Right.
So even if Orpheus is not comparable to them, obviously one could try to make some sort of analogy between the Ripu contest and maybe Orpheus using his music skills to kind of attract the gods' attention and favor, but that's kind of grasping at straws, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Either way, it's a different etymological proposal that would not allow for our relationship with elf.
All right. Well, throw it out
If
then.
these were attractive.
That's
All right,
interesting.
so
That's very interesting. Yeah.
yeah, I mean,
Um,
if it doesn't check out etymologically, they're lined mythically, anyways.
exactly. Yeah.
So
That's why I mentioned it at the very end of my book. I was like, these don't seem to connect. It's very questionable at linguistically, but you got to look at these two words side by side. It's very interesting to add to just sort of tack on why the word rebus and elves kind of when you look at their roots, especially, I think very similar looking root words that don't quite connect. So it's fascinating because they have a
yeah,
clear mythical parallel. So it's one of these things that just leaves you scratching your head, but people need to be aware of that detail as well. So
yeah. So yeah, I was back to what I was bringing up about the similarities and the separations of the fire gods and the Gaelic and uh, Scandinavian. So the main celestial fire god that has the main narrative myths, you have Odin and Manannán being in the same place more than one time. Then you have a separate name being given to the higher fire god, who is one with Rudra at the highest place, where they're separating heaven and earth and animating mankind, which is a mythic event that's meant to happen immediately after the separation of heaven and earth, with Lothar and Erevan. Lothar and Erevan being the brothers of Odin or Finn. And then you have the terrestrial fire, which is meant to represent, normal fires that you see in the world. And you've discussed as Ith in Gaelic, but is the Etin Logi in Nordic material. Logi
Right.
is famously the Etin that Loki is put up against in contests when Thor and Loki go to Utgard Loki's hall. And he's put against him in an eating competition. Loki eats all the food, but Loki eats all of the food plus the utensils and the table. And it's later explained to him by Utgard Loki that this illusion, that it was really fire that he was competing against that consumes everything. So that's not really much more than that. I do know that Logi, along with Hleur, which is another name for Agia or Gimir, being the sea, and Kori, which is a name for the wind, are said to be sons of an Etin named Fornjotr, which is like ancient Ute. I forget which source this is in, but it doesn't really say any more than that. But it's really just to highlight that in India, and possibly Iran as well, because I think Agni is called Atar there. The fire god represents all fires. The only thing he's really distinct from is these smith gods, like the Rebus and Tvashtar. But in Europe, there seems to be more differentiations made, mythically at least.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wonder if it's kind of like Logi is just all mundane types of fire, or if it's something else, is an Etinish side of fire. But his name, like Ith, like you mentioned, Logi just is like the mundane, literal word for fire. Ith is this literal word for fire, rather than it seems the celestial version isn't called this sort of more literalistic word. So I wonder if Logi's like literally the terrestrial fire in the same way, or if he's like an Etinish way. But yeah, it seems like he could be just like I've theoretically. We don't have enough material to see what else he did in his role, in his capacity there. I know someone like William Reeves or someone connected to him, I don't know who it was, has theorized that the court of Utgarth Loki is somehow equivalent to like Surt or the cosmic, or like the craftsman on a high level. I can't remember exactly. I'm going to get this wrong and misrepresent them, unfortunately. But the concept was that there are some connections pointing to Utgarth Loki being equivalent to Surt or something like that. Surt, or perhaps one of the Smiths like Sindri, or that they were equating all three of those together. And then you have one of the things was that he is the lord over Logi, the fire, and so Surt is like the cosmic Etinish fire, and then you have Logi as this more lower level mundane Etinish fire. And so yeah, there's some other connections there. I found that interesting just to say, because I've identified Utgarth Loki as the Prajapati type and Surt as the Purusha type. Prajapati is also Tvashtar. Surt is also, Purusha is also Vishvakarman. There is a continuity there on an esoteric level. So I don't have the evidence I'm referring to in front of me to say if the connections they posited were strong, but it is interesting that there might be other echoes connecting down the line through these levels of the fire / craftsman's, right? So that there might be some trace. I don't know if it's there or not, between Surt as this Purusha fire down to Logi as continuing on through the Prajapati, working under Prajapati in a sense. It's interesting to see how that could echo down, because again, you see like Manawyddan carrying forward the fire very explicitly. They had some concept of the fire roles kind of passing down the levels of the cosmos.
Yeah, for sure. And then the other thing I brought up, this is something I'm still speculating on, but reading Thidric Saga of Bern, Wayland having a son. So he has two sons. One of them is Jaime, and then that he has with his wife. And then when he's hamstrung and held hostage by King Neithun, he gets revenge on him by killing his two sons, and then impregnating his daughter. And by his daughter, he has a son who goes by many spellings of his name, because it's originally a continental Germanic myth that got translated into Old English and Old Norse. So it's Vitiga or Vidga. Anyways, the son of Wayland the Smith. This one in particular seems like he could be an ugly parallel to me. Didrik von Bern himself, to me, seems like he could be Thor or Donner, because he's famous for his giant slaying, and he's a leader of a retinue, and he's not a king, he is a prince, which I think is a pretty good detail in at least some Western European stuff where the god is not king or is explicitly denied kingship. So you have, I don't remember if when I first joined, you guys were talking about stuff between Arjuna and Agni from Mahabharata. Is there, excuse me a moment, is there anything where like a thunder god and the fire god are having having conflict with one another?
Good question. Not off the top of my head, but you never know. The other thing about Agni is that he's a domestic friend, and this comes through with Manannán, I think. Manannán tests Cormac, but he then makes everything well again with him in the end, even though Cormac loses his family through the test at first. It's sort of it's like a Christmas Carol or something, where he makes everything well again at the end. And yeah, he is like a friendly god. He's like he's a benefactor, very positive god for the most part, but then he randomly will be a destructive Agni as well here and there. So the only thing I could think of would be if there was some time where Agni was burning out of control, and Indra or something had to bring rains to put out fire in the forest or something. But I don't know if that ever happens, actually. It's something I could picture happening in one of these epics, maybe, but I don't know. You know anything, Josephus?
Well, I don't think I recall anything. I can see it happening, but I would have to look it up. Maybe if there's any reference, anything that could help us make the link.
Right. So nothing where they're just like fighting each other, that as far as I know. Here's one that's interesting, actually. Okay. Let's see. Agni eats the forest of Khandava to appease his hunger. Okay, that's not. Never mind. I thought there was something here that might have been similar to that, but there are times where Agni's kind of like out of control, eating the forest or burning things here once or twice.
Yeah, and I might have to read through some of this again, so I might be misinterpreting what's happening, but I remember at some point, so Jaime and Vitiga, Jaime I think is Heimdall up on the pot. Excuse me again. They battle Dietrich von Bern to join his court of knights, but then later on in the saga, Vitiga kills somebody close to Dietrich, and he chases him in revenge to claim Weregild. And Vitiga escapes Dietrich by riding into the sea, and it's said that he's protected by this Nixie, which is a Germanic water nymph, who is said to be the mother of his sire or grandsire, sire meaning father. So it's an ancestor of his. But that's really all there is. I mean, when I first read that he had the tongs and hammer of his father on his banner, it reminded me of Manannán having the belt,
right,
and tools of Goivnu. But at the moment, it's not
very well could.
conclusive enough.
How do you spell his name again?
I can type them out. There's tons of different spellings.
Okay.
You'll probably find a Wikipedia page for it with WITTICH. That's probably what the Wikipedia page is under. But there are so many different spellings. If you look up Wayland's son or Woland's son.
Okay. Wittig? Wittig or Wittig?
Yeah, Wittig.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that sounds. Yeah. That definitely sounds plausible to me.
Yeah, and it's interesting to me how Germanic mythology is usually unique in that Odin is an incredibly composite deity compared to any other. But just as we notice with every other mythology, the Euhemeride legends are curiously more conservative than the actual lore of the gods themselves, that you have the separation of all of these composite natures of Odin in the Euhemeride lore potentially.
Yeah, that can definitely be the case. So it's important, and that's one thing. I'm not too knowledgeable on the sagas and things of Norse material. It's sort of a gap in my knowledge. So I'm sure there's a lot more that can be kind of dug out of it. I know some people are doing that sort of thing. I know you are investigating a lot of that yourself, Arno. So it's definitely there's a lot. I'm sure that could be extracted in this way. Okay. Well, there was one comment I was going to bring up here, if I could find it, but perhaps not right now. The only other thing I wanted to point out on going back to Manannán is that Manannán's character in the stories, especially sort of the folk tradition, is that he is this shapeshifter who tests mortals or tests different people, and that is what we see with Agni, is that he can be this shapeshifter, which makes sense if you understand the nature of fire, changing into different forms, but specifically we do see this with Agni. So let's see if I can pull this up. Agni is shown to shapeshift to test humans. For example, he tests King Shibi, Shibi, in the form of a pigeon, the king then passing the test and proving his selfless virtue. That's in the Mahabharata Vana Parva, chapter 131. So I just think that drives at the heart of what we see of sort of the personality of Manannán, and it is there in Agni, especially having the one that he tests demonstrate his virtue, his selflessness. It reminds, in a different way, it reminds obliquely of the Cormac story that we also touched on there, of him testing Cormac. So perhaps there's a root between them. Who knows? And of course, he tests in these other ways I described, but the shape shifting added to that is just even more. Who is the shapeshifter to test humans? It seems to be the Agni type, more or less. Although any god can do that, but it just adds to the pile, I think. And then one thing I want to also just drive home is, I think I see Manannán a lot of times in scholarship connected to Apam-napat, who we touched on earlier. There's strong reason to believe that Apam-napat and the Indo-European, Proto-Indo-European level were distinct, and that they became conflated in the Vedas, and that's fine, and they have similarities and overlaps. But I think it's crucial to not fall into the sort of trap of identifying Manannán as Apam-napat, because to me it seems like a sort of compromise position. It's a sort of, if you don't understand the material fully, you will see Apam-napat means nephew or descendant of waters, and you'll see Manannán, son of the sea, and that seems to be like, you can say, well, he's probably Apam-napat, that's good enough. But it's one of these things where if you kind of take the superficial conclusion, it's a compromise that is actually an error. It doesn't help you really to do that, because they are different gods on the Proto-Indo-European level, and it seems like they came down to the other branches as separate god types. Therefore, Manannán most likely is not Apam-napat at all, and that once you understand the full myths, as I've kind of laid out, once you understand the Agni mythos, that is what Manannán really matches. Ide himself even doesn't embody the Agni mythos nearly as fully as Manannán does. Manannán really has the extended Agni mythos because he is the celestial Agni. So yeah, don't take a half measure to identify him as just Apam-napat, because that is sort of stepping into an error. When you just go the full length and understand the mythos in full to get to the right, to get to the correct answer, and hopefully that will be helpful and clarifying, instead of I think it doesn't help us too much. It leaves us kind of confused or just lacking clarity to just suppose, compromise that he might be Apam-napat. So hopefully the distinction can be understood, and if you'd like more information on that, please check the book chapter on that particular topic, and I go into it more. So any last thoughts, gentlemen, on this topic? I think we've gone into a lot. I guess if anyone has any final thoughts on Odin and his fire role, that could be mentioned here at the end as well, but maybe we have touched on the main things. What do you think?
I mean, one could open the can of worms of how Rudra is related to the sun, and the sun is related to Agni and the fire type. But I mean, we kind of also mentioned it in the Rudra stream, and in this stream we talked about the Agni and sun kind of connection. So I think it's pretty clear. Our listeners can figure it out pretty easily.
Well, if anyone wants to do some further speculation, the only child, many, that Odin and Skadi are said to have is Saemingr. I don't think much is said about him other than that, but maybe there could be something that's found that would just be further.
Right. Yeah. Interesting.
But
yeah, there was one comment, I think from James Fields. I'm not sure who brought. Oh, here it is. Yeah, this is what I wanted to bring up. So Ynglinga Saga 10 says, Odin was burnt, and at his pile there was a great splendor. It was their faith that the higher the smoke arose in the air, whose pile it was, and the richer he would be. So it's a connection between them. It's not too explicit. I know that in one of Arya Akasha's articles, I think that was where I first saw the equation connecting Odin and Agni, and it might have been using this passage as well as some other material. So yeah, he made some great points. I think one of his stronger comparisons there. And then just to summarize kind of the points where it shows Odin in a fire role, it seems to be when Odin turns into the eagle to bring the mead back home. And then I would argue that when Odin marries Skadi, that is actually the fire role in the Soma cycle. As we said, with Manawyddan marrying Rhiannon and Agni marrying Surya, because Skadi really is the Surya type. So why does this bride pass from Njordr to Odin? I think that is because Odin is in the fire role there, most likely. It's arguable. And then of course, if Odin's two brothers really are aspects of himself, then that Lothar role would connect to the fire role. And there are probably others here and there that, unidentified or in the legends. So with that, any last words, you guys? Did you have something to say?
I mean, Odin is also one who disguises himself to test people. That's also kind of in a sense where like Zeus and Hermes disguise themselves as mortals to test people's hospitality. He's usually test people's hospitality, but he also has a name,
right?
Pratham the Freystudar, which means raven tester.
Right. Hey, I mean, it very well could go back to that, or at least in some overlapping way, because there's also the story that we brought up the other day about Shiva. Shiva disguises himself as an old man as well to test Indra in that one story, which reminded us of Harbard and Harbard's law, whatever. So yeah, there could be roles where the Rudra type does the same, and there could just be overlap. One of my lingering questions is how much fully and deeply did the Celts and other branches identify their Rudra type, like Finn, and their fire type on a higher level, and just really have an esoteric understanding that they really were one? How much did they think Manannán really is an aspect of Finn? You know what I mean? Because we see other things where Kian is called Finn, and Kian is this Pushanic aspect that is wrapped up with Odin in just as part of Odin in the Norse version. So is it the same with Finn and Manannán is my other question. Because Manannán has the son Mongan, you know? Manannán impregnates a human woman, or is there to, I forget exactly how he causes the parentage. And then Mongan is born, but then Mongan is said to be the reincarnation of Finn McCool. You see what I'm saying? So Manannán is there as the father figure, and usually it's the god's own reincarnation. But then Mongan in the tradition gets identified with Finn McCool instead. So is that like an implicit connection between them? Is the fact that Manawyddan is there in the creation myth as the brother of Efnisien, is that an implicit thing, just like Lothar is implicitly an aspect of Odin? There's other things like that where I wonder if they just had a deep understanding that indeed Manannán really is the flip side of the Finn type. So I think that's a good place to leave things. It's a thing to speculate on. Personally, I think there's a strong case to be made that they did have that esoteric understanding, just like the Norse, but at the same time, they kept them separate. And just like the Vedic, it says repeatedly, Rudra is Agni, but then they have separate mythos, mythoi, you know? So something to consider there, because the other thing that brings us to is there are these like sort of hard to identify figures like the Bodach, the old man, and the Bodach is usually identified as Manannán, but there are indications that it could have indicated like the higher, connected to the Finn type somehow, similar to like the Smith of the Sea. There's the sea smith in some Scottish lore and other folk traditions. He's sort of a mysterious figure, but it seems like it's hard to boil that figure down to just a Tvashtar type, just a Govnu type. So the question is that really like a name of the point where Finn and Manannán meet on a higher level? So I can't answer that question, at least right now, but see if there's any clues out there that could say one way or another. And yeah, all right. Well, thank you guys once again for discussing with me today. That was a lot of fun. And thank you to everyone for listening and commenting. And we'll have to see you next time, hopefully. All right.
All right. See you. Thank you.
See you next time.
All right. See ya.